Welcome to the Disrupt Now podcast. This is Natalie Viglione, your host, and this is Season 2, Unlocking the Cosmic Mysteries Around New Earth Magic. My desire is to bring conversations that serve as cosmic medicine for all of the sacred souls that seek the revealing of the magic and mystery of the organic celestial energies. I powerfully step in as a sacred vessel for the Cosmic Mother, or as we can say, the divine feminine energy rising. I walk an authentic druidic path of primordial tradition, and I am here to share wisdom and the highest truth for the betterment of all beings, animals, minerals, plant life, and all that is. Please join me on this journey to explore and awaken the magic again. What if the thoughts that are telling you consistently that you're broken actually wasn't coming from you at all? In this soul-shaking episode of the Disrupt Now podcast, we're going to be pulling back the veil on a reality that most are too afraid to talk about. I'm Natalie Viglione, and today we are going to be diving into a conversation that could change the way you understand, or understand, as I like to say, mental illness, trauma, and your own inner world forever. Joining me in this episode is Jerry Marzinsky. He's been on 2 other episodes, so he's returning, and in this episode, we're going to be expanding our conversation and having someone join us to share her story. Jerry Marzinsky is a former psychotherapist who spent decades inside of the prison system, as well as within the largest mental institution in the world, where he was questioning mainstream psychiatric narratives, and the powers that be did not like that at all. We are returning in this episode to bring Judy Gregerson, who is a very courageous soul, a survivor of deep spiritual torment, who found her way out through healing and divine light. Together, we're exposing the truth about the vile, parasitic entities that feed off unresolved trauma. These are entities that use negative voices with the intent to harm, manipulate, isolate, and also destroy. But there is a way to sovereignty. There is a way to freedom. And it begins when you are empowered to face trauma, to clear that trauma, to raise your vibrational field, all the layers and all the levels, to a place where these parasitic, what have been called demonic, and what I know are actual technologies, for lack of a better word, making an environment they can no longer survive in or around your field, your light body. This is bringing in some spiritual truths that we must see, that we must hear, and we must talk about and bring this into the light. This is about reclaiming your light, your energy, and your truest of true authentic self. So if you've ever struggled with depression where it feels like you cannot get out of that spiral, invasive, negative thoughts with the intent to actually do harm to you or to others, emotional overwhelm that comes out of nowhere, or if you're supporting someone who has had this, or you have friends that are experiencing this, then this would be the episode for you. Because the truth is, you are not broken. You are under energetic invasion. And now it's time to be empowered, to rise, and to reclaim your sacred temple, your sacred space, which is you. Let us go on this journey together, and I hope you find as much empowerment in this story as I did. I would also like to say that Jerry and Judy both wrote books about these experiences, and I would love to recommend those books to you, and we'll have those linked in the description and in all the places so that you can get access to the wonderful insights that they're bringing. Let's dive into this episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. I'm really excited, as noted in the intro to this. We are joined and gathered here today with Jerry and Judy. I again want to express my profound gratitude to you both for being here on the show. So I can't wait to dive in with you and really delve deeply into this oh so important topic that we're going to dive in today.
Okay, you want me to start off?
Yeah, so
Okay.
as noted in the intro, Jerry, you and I have had some good long conversations previously in a couple of episodes, which again, I do want to ensure everybody to go listen to those too, because these are all connected stories. But yeah, Jerry, dive on in.
Okay. Well, the topic we're going to be covering mostly today is the voices that schizophrenics hear. Okay? All through graduate school, they taught us, oh, the voices are auditory hallucinations. You know, they didn't go into any detail on what they were at all. They just go auditory hallucinations. So I'm thinking, well, that's like word salad. They don't make any sense. They're all over the place. It's just, verbal garbage. That's not what I saw when I started working at one of the biggest state hospitals on the planet. It looked to me when I started off with, it looked like a one-sided telephone conversation where I could hear the schizophrenic talking to the voices, but I couldn't hear what they were telling them. Okay. And then it just got to like, I started investigating what these things were, and I spent decades studying the voices. And I saw they were running fixed patterns, a number of fixed patterns. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run patterns.
Right.
Okay? And you can find a whole list of these patterns on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. Psychiatrists look at it. It's right in front of your freaking eyes. It's not hidden in some genetic anything or a biochemical imbalance. You will see these patterns for yourself. You
Yeah.
know, and they're repeatable fixed patterns. Okay, so there's something there. This is the operational definition of these voices. Now, I started interfering with these patterns, and then the prisoners I was working with came back and said they don't like that. They don't want us coming here. They don't want us listening to you. They don't want us doing anything that you want. I'm like, well, that's interesting. So the more I interfered with those patterns, when I got better at it, I had one inmate come up and he goes, the voices want to speak to you. Knocked on my door one day. That had never happened before in 20 years. So I'm like, they want to speak to me personally. He says, yeah, they want to speak to you personally. Right. So I let him in and I go, okay, what do they have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And that freaked me out. It was like,
Yeah.
that was the first time that, even though I had tons of evidence to the contrary, that was the first time I fully realized, because I didn't want to believe that these things were demons or had their own intelligence, and that, but that's what it looked like. When
Yeah.
that happened, it's like they are, they are entities. And the prisoner I was talking to, he said, that wasn't me, that was them. I didn't say that. And then I said, well, tell them this. And he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can hear everything you say. They can see every move you make. And that freaked me out even more. Right. So that's the
Yeah.
first time where it really clicked in, after decades of studying these things, that they were not hallucinations, that these things had an intelligence, that they could speak back, that they existed within the schizophrenic. Okay? Now, understanding that these voices are not part of the schizophrenic, they don't belong to them, they're coming from somewhere else, is critical to their recovery. Now,
Yep.
what psychiatry is doing is just the opposite of that. They're telling these people these voices are hallucinations, just ignore them. The first time I heard that, I called that person back a week later and I said, I was with you when the psychiatrist told you to ignore the voices. How did that work for you? He said, not well at all. They just got louder. They got more persistent. They refused to be ignored. And then I started questioning others. There was no shortage of schizophrenics either in the prison where I worked in the psychology department or at the state hospital. So when I found something, I would ask all the rest of them, does this go for you too? So each one of these patterns have been screened through hundreds of schizophrenics. It's not just one or two. We're having hundreds of them are all saying the same thing. Okay. And they don't know each other. So what psychiatry is telling schizophrenics that these things are auditory hallucinations, they have no research whatsoever to back that. They haven't done any research at all. They just got up there and went, we are the psychiatrists, we're the high priest of psychiatry, and we hereby declare that these voices are hallucinations, and just ignore them. They're not real. They're very real. You'll hear Judy in a few minutes. You'll be talking. They're very real. All right.
Yeah.
So they come from outside. They don't come from inside. They're very low frequency beings. Okay. They sound pretty much just like all the other thousands of thoughts, for the most part, that go through your mind on any day. But the content, the intention, is very different. It's very negative. It's very dangerous. It's very self-demeaning. It's very kind of aggressive. They put the person down. They tell them all kinds of rotten things about them. They interpret reality for them. Say, well, that this person is talking behind your back, or this person is going to stab you in the back. They try to turn families against one another. They try to turn girlfriends against boyfriends, husbands against wives. They want to destroy the family, and they hate children. They will tell the parents to abuse the children. So what it looks like, and what I've seen, is that they set up the conditions in these children for them to become schizophrenic also. And I remember one guy I talked to, his mother was schizophrenic, and he had to get away from her because he started hearing voices also. And as soon as he got away from her, those things disappeared. Okay. So here's psychiatry telling these people, your mind is broken. There's nothing you can do about it except take our toxic meds. And these meds, they insist that these meds are safe and, effective. They're neither. Out of every 100 patients that are taking antipsychotic drugs, 1 to 2 of them die from these drugs. They are toxic. They actually destroy the brain, and with long-term use, they will turn it into like a shrunken walnut. They found that in autopsies with patients who were on these drugs for years in the state hospital. Okay. Now, these people are making $3.5 billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs. Psychiatrists are making like 250 per visit. They have no investment in telling you the truth. They have no investment in investigating these voices. And the 2 times I got caught by psychiatrists asking patients, what are these things telling you? I was called up and told, you will not do that. These are auditory hallucinations. By asking them what they are, you're reinforcing the hallucination and you're making them worse. I knew that was a bunch of BS at the time, but you don't argue with these guys. And most of them are very arrogant. They just have this air of aloofment, like, the high priest of old,
Yeah. Yeah.
And their diagnoses are all made up too. The chemical imbalance, where they're telling these patients that these voices are due to a chemical imbalance of the brain. Now, anybody who believes that, when you go, if you're a schizophrenic, you go to the psychiatrist's office, you see if they gave you any kind of objective test, any kind of lab test, any kind of blood work, any kind of test whatsoever to see what is out of balance in your brain or by how much. You won't see it because it doesn't exist. They made this up. Eli Lilly made that up in when they came up with Prozac. And now the universities are teaching it. They're putting it in all their papers. They have hoodwinked the entire planet. This is a very dark organization.
Yeah.
Big pharma mixed with psychiatry. I mean, they're hand in hand. They block any negative research about these drugs or about the voices or about anything else. So, if you go to a psychiatrist's office and you're schizophrenic, they're going to ask you if you hear voices. You say yes. You're automatically going to come out of there with an antipsychotic drug that will eventually rot out your brain and your peripheral nervous system with long enough use. And they won't tell you that. They'll tell you you'll get blurred vision, you'll feel groggy, there'll be sexual dysfunction, but they won't tell you that it's actually going to rot out your central nervous system and cause permanent neurological damage with long-term use. It won't be there. Okay. So we're going to let Judy talk, and Judy has dealt with these voices for many years. They almost got her to kill herself several times. It's very confusing when they start. The person doesn't know what they are. They go, what are they? Where do they come from? And they have no idea, and there's nobody there to tell them.
Exactly.
So you just believe it's you because you're hearing the voices in your head. So if it's coming from your head, it must be you.
Yeah.
And that's not the truth. And that's what psychiatry tells these people. Your brain is broken. You've got to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life. And you got to come see me every month and pay $250 to, for the prescription to get these things.
If not more, right? Could be
if not
thousands.
More.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's so disgusting about that, I live 60 miles from the Mexican border. You can drive across that border, and these drugs that people are paying, like hundreds of dollars a month for, you can go across the border and get them for $75. These are not abusable drugs. Nobody in their right mind, even in their wrong mind, wants to take these things. Their side effects are awful, and yet psychiatry is clutching them like this is their sacred cross. They will not allow them to go out in the U.S. without prescription. They charge 10 times as much for these same drugs as you can get across the border in Mexico. You don't need a psychiatrist to buy them in Mexico. But what they usually do, they'll see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said, well, I think you got this. This is a drug you take. When you run out, you go to the pharmacy and you get it yourself. You don't have to go back through a psychiatrist again and pay another $250. And then they're wondering, why are medical costs so high in the U.S.?
Right.
We're being robbed blind.
And lied to. I mean, it's
lied to and deceived.
Yeah. It's pure, there's just no other word for it. It's just pure evil. Truly.
It is. It's pure evil. I've seen it for decades, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. Truly. Yeah, and one thing that I think that isn't talked about a lot either is, when the antipsychotics are prescribed, I'm really in this place of seeing it as I believe that those are the very things that can actually break the vibrational layers or the auric field or the protection layers. And actually it makes that human more susceptible to the very voices and entities and things that we're talking about. Like it lowers their ability to even respond properly.
Yeah, it kind of turns them into zombies. But the voices are parasitic entities.
Exactly.
The reason, one of the first patterns I saw is they're consistently negative. They're consistently derogatory and abusive. What they want to do is create negative emotion, and that's what they feed off of. And then that emotion disappears after they attack.
Exactly.
They're actually sucking that negative energy out of the person, leaving them just with nothing.
Yep. And we wonder where the whole lore of vampires comes from.
Yes. That's why it's so spooky.
Exactly. Because these very things we think are entertainment are actually like entrainment of, by the way, this is actually what's going on in the world, but we're going to make it seem like it's a movie, and it's just like, for laughs.
Yeah, like it's science fiction.
Exactly.
I think they know that at some subconscious level. Everybody knows that, which is why that's so spooky.
Exactly. Well, Judy, thank you so much for being here again and for being here to tell your story and share. I know we have a lot to dive into. So I guess, the best place to start is where you feel the best place to start might be.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we'll dig in from there.
Okay. Well, I was listening to Jerry talk, and he was talking about how these things set up kids. And I think I'll start there because they build a groundwork in somebody's life, and that that groundwork that they build, even when you overcome the voices, you've still got to deal with that. And for me, my life began with a tremendous amount of trauma. I came from a family that disintegrated over a period of about 7 or 8 years. My mother ended up in a psych ward trying to dry out. My dad kind of just checked out. He was a narcissist. And I was the youngest of 4 children, and I lived through terrible things that they did. They were both alcoholics and grew up with that. And so I began to develop as a young kid a pretty negative self-image. By the time I was 13, I tried to commit suicide. I took a bottle of pills. I was very angry. I had a chip on my shoulder. So all this was building in me. So by the time I got to college, I was carrying all that. I was carrying bitterness and anger and resentment, and I was lost. I was so lost because my family didn't give me a groundwork. My groundwork was trauma. That's all I knew. Trauma and triggers, and I didn't even understand it at that point in my life. So when I got to college, I had no real ground to stand on for building a life. So everything that happened was a trauma. It just triggered all my trauma. So every problem that you might have in college, and it's like you go to college and things don't always go right. For me, it was a reason to slit my wrists. It was a reason to overdose on pills because I couldn't cope with anything. I had no coping skills. And so I got involved my freshman year with drugs. I got involved, I did a lot of LSD, tremendous amount of LSD. I basically lived on it day after day. And finally, towards the end of the year, I had a bad trip, and it scared me really badly because I don't really remember the trip, but I remember there was a tremendous amount of fear, and I realized I was going in a direction that was going to destroy me. That's kind of how I felt. So I stopped doing it. And I went home that summer from college, and I was working as a waitress, and I started having dissociative episodes where I would be carrying a tray of food to a table, and suddenly the room would go totally silent, and I'd go blank, and I didn't know where I was or who I was. And that would last 3, 4, or 5 seconds, maybe longer. I don't really remember. And then boop, I'd pop right back into reality and go on. And that happened several times, and I didn't know that I was heading towards a breakdown is what I was doing. And I didn't know it. So I went back to college, and a guy that I was very much in love with was back that year, and I really wanted to get more involved with him. And I was very needy. And I actually thought that I could, and I had no identity because my identity was just all this negative garbage, but I had nothing healthy as an identity. And so I wanted to get close enough to people that I could kind of, I could live off their energy almost. It was a weird thing. I could live off their identity. I wanted to kind of live in their identity. And that scared him to death. So he left. And right around that time, I had become a Christian. I was involved with a Christian group on campus. It didn't offer me much. I found no answers there, but I sensed that for me, it was a good way to go. And so I stuck with it. And this guy left, and I was just despondent about it. So I had some Valium, and I took out a bottle of Valium, and I took the whole bottle. And I was lying there, and I could feel myself drifting off. And as I was drifting off, I realized in a very strong sense that I was going to die. And if I died, I was probably going to go to hell. That was my sense. And that scared me. And I picked up the phone and called my roommate. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in the hospital with tubes in my throat that I was pulling out and screaming and kicking. But that kind of was my entrance into the psychiatric community, into the mental health system, because I was in New York. And so if you try to commit suicide, you go into the system.
Mm.
So I went into the system. But before that happened, and it's hard, this happened 50 years ago, so it's hard to remember the chronology of some of this stuff. But before that happened, I was lying in my dorm room one day and smoking pot and listening to music, and I began to see a door. And it was like a hallucination. But I visualized this door. There was this big wooden door. It was big. And I felt that door was calling to me, and I thought, well, okay, I'll go through the door. I'd done a lot of acid, and I'd gone through all kinds of things in acid. This was nothing new, a door, let's go. So I thought, well, this will be fun. So I went through the door, and when I went through the door, I believe now, looking back, as that was when I allowed these entities, I gave them permission. I walked through their door and I said, okay, here I am. And they said, okay, here we are. And that door shut. And when that door shut, I was in another, mentally, I was in another realm. I was in another dimension. And the voices began to talk to me. And there were 4 of them. And they were demeaning. They were nasty. They mocked me. They said nasty things about me. They told me my life was over. They told me that I would never be well, that I had broken myself. And I didn't understand. Jerry and I have talked about this. I didn't understand what the voices were. They were definitely voices. There were 4 of them. And there were 2 in front of me and 2 behind me, which is how I knew there were 4.
Wow.
And they would talk, and they would talk to each other. But in their talking to each other, they would mock me. It was a constant mock on me.
Wow.
And constant, so it's, it's like if you're in a room and you have 4 people that are attacking you, telling you you're a piece of crap, you're never going to be any good, nobody wants you, nobody loves you, kill yourself, you should die. And you hear that constantly.
I had a similar experience when I started, moving into what the voices were. It was like a whole different dimension, and it played by a whole different set of rules. So it's like I had one foot in where you were talking about, Judy, and the other foot on the other side of the door. But I never all the way went through. I would just kind of halfway and look around, and it was like I was very clear that I didn't know what the rules were. I didn't know who was over there. I didn't know how things worked there, and it was pretty scary. And there was nobody to talk to. I couldn't talk to anybody about what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, what the voices were saying, what I was learning. I had to keep it all to myself, and that went on for many years until I met Sherry, the co-author of my book. She was the first sane person that I could talk to about this stuff. You couldn't talk to anybody at work, and my wife would say, well, what are you doing picking through the heads of, psychotic inmates anyway, So,
right.
Yeah, it was a very lonely feeling.
Yeah.
Well, and when you're in that world, you are alone. And as I've explained it, you're in one realm in your mind. Because we live in our mind. That's where consciousness is. But your mind is in this other dimension. Your body is in the world. Now, you're not allowed to participate in the world other than to go through whatever is expected of you. You have to get up.
Emotions.
You have to eat. You go through the motions. I told the psychiatrist I was hearing voices. He diagnosed me. He put me on drugs. But I never told my friends that I heard voices. What I would tell them was, they would say, well, what's going on with you? And I'd say, well, I'm not here. And they're like, well, where are you? And I said, I don't know where I am, but I can't get out. And it's like being trapped in a prison. And you live in that world, and in that world, you are emotionally paralyzed.
Yeah.
Completely. It's like if you had a panic attack where you're paralyzed, you're like that 24 hours a day. You're emotionally paralyzed. You thinking is very difficult. You can do some thinking, but not like you would just sit and think freely, because your mind is also to some degree paralyzed. So you're not free to think, you're not free to feel. And in that world, there is no love. There is no hope. There is no peace. All it is torment. And it is overwhelmingly run and managed by fear. That is what they use on you. The fear was so great. The paranoia was so great. I thought somebody was going to come and take me and punish me. And they would tell me, you're going to be punished for what you did. It's like, I think, what did I do? And I'd look back over my life. Well, I made a lot of mistakes as a teenager and a young adult. And I thought, I'm going to be punished. Somebody's going to come and they're going to punish me. And I never knew. So you live in this hyper vigilance that wears you out. And Jerry's talked a lot about how they suck the energy out and the life out of you. Just being in that hyper vigilant state and trying to fight them and trying to figure out what they are and trying to figure out how you're going to get rid of them is exhausting. And then when they double down, and they do at times, they double down. There are times where they're not so bad and you're just kind of in a numb state of nothingness, but you're not being attacked. And then they double down and they come and they start up again.
I remember one guy I spoke to, the voices were talking behind him, plotting how they were going to kill him. Well, should we get him to run in front of a car? And here they were debating how they were going to kill him. And that just went on for days and days and days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, and they tell you you are nothing, you're worth nothing, you'll never be anything. And they tell you you will never be free. There is no way out. There's no way out. And when I started, I took 3 drugs. And when I started on those drugs, the voices kind of melded into my own thoughts. It kind of damped them down. So I began to think it was my own thoughts. I think I almost thought kind of the voices had left. It was just me. And what I figured was that I had shattered. I thought I'd done so much LSD that I had shattered my mind. And the psychiatrist told me, you're going to be like this forever, so learn to live with it. Well, how do you how do you live in constant terror?
Very hopeless message. Very hopeless message.
Oh yeah. They hand you despair. Yeah. And so it is a place of despair. And I would have blackouts where I found myself one time in the New York State Thruway driving towards a bridge and not knowing how I got on the Thruway, what day it was, how I got there, didn't know. Sometimes I would look in the mirror and I would think, well, that's me. And then I go, I don't know. I don't know if that's me. Is that me? So I couldn't really fully recognize myself. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I look in the mirror and I knew the face, but I couldn't connect who I was with that face.
Now, Judy, did those voices sound any different from the thousands of other thoughts you went through your mind? Was there any difference in tone or anything? Or was it just the content was consistently negative and abusive?
When they first started, Jerry, to me, I didn't know what they were. They sounded different to me, but it's so long ago, it's hard to remember exactly what they sounded like. But then when I got on the drugs, it just became my thoughts. So I thought, okay, I ruined myself. I'm a piece of junk. I shouldn't be living. I should kill myself. In fact, at one point, they told me to kill a friend of mine who had gotten me involved in drugs and told me to smash his head in with a heavy lamp until he was dead. But I was not homicidal. I was suicidal, but I wasn't homicidal. And the psychiatrist, every time I saw him, he'd ask me, are you suicidal? Are you homicidal? And I would deny both. I would deny that I was suicidal.
They're just covering their butts. They don't want anybody on their caseload killing themselves. Now, 50,000 people in the United States kill themselves every year. A good many of them are on psychiatric drugs at the time. And it's these entities that are telling them the kind of stuff that Judy's talking about.
Yeah.
So the suicide rate is increasing every year. And the amount of psychiatric drugs is increasing every year, and so is the psychiatrist, and nobody's getting any better. Our mental health system as it exists right now is an abject failure.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah, and the drugs that they gave me, all they did was turn me into a zombie. It's like the entities take your mind, the drugs take your soul, and you're just a void. And I always tell people I felt like I was in a deep, deep hole that I could barely see out of, that it was so big, and that I could have screamed till I turned blue and nobody would hear me. And you are always in your head kind of screaming. You're always looking for your way out. You're trying to figure out how you can unbreak yourself because nobody knows how. And, I remember the other day I was thinking about, I used to try to change the channel in my head. Because I thought if I changed the channel in my head, and it's crazy to think that you have channels in your head, but I really thought I had channels in my head. So I would change the channel like it was a radio. But every channel, these voices, these thoughts were there. I couldn't escape them. There was no channel to get away.
Right.
So, it is, they come to kill, steal, and destroy. And they had come to kill, steal everything I had and destroy everything I had. And there was no way out.
Could we go back to just a moment? I think that the interesting thing, Jerry and I were chatting just before we all came on, and, I find that moment of that doorway extremely intriguing. And, you know, I think that this gave, you know, I heard you say that on another show, and I thought, wow, this is a whole new concept of a gateway drug kind of thing. Like, what is the gateway? Where are these gateways going? So in that moment, I'm just curious if anything comes up that you can, because I think that, you know, that's the thing that's also, you know, people like to run, and especially today, go do these ayahuasca ceremonies and all these kinds of things. And they do not get what they are messing with. They don't get the realms. They don't get what actually is on the table is your soul, is your consciousness, and, you know, to be extremely protective of those layers. When that door closed and you mentioned that it kind of just, what do you remember, what kind of ensued around that time, as much as you can remember anyway, from a feeling place? Like, was it just all of a sudden, like, whatever was before, which was, you know, you didn't have these parasites attached into your field, but at that moment, it's like they were like, okay, come on in. It's now join, you know, let's all be in the club together. Can you talk about that just a little bit? I feel like that's a really important thing that people can take into their own experiences to think about deeply.
Well, here's something to think about. They're saying now that causes schizophrenia, marijuana. They're saying a lot of these young boys who are schizophrenic suddenly, it's because of pot. Well, I know why it's because of pot. Because when you get high and you can have your visualizations and your hallucinations on pot, you know, if you're really into pot, you can move your head and your mind that way. It is a gateway. It is a door. And if you say, okay, I'll go through that door, you're entering their world. You're giving them permission to take you. And these kids who are smoking pot, now I don't know that they'd have the same experience of walking through a door, but there is that moment that, you know, you're crossing something. And I don't know that I realized at the time, it didn't feel bad. It felt inviting. It was calling to me. You know, I could hear it. I could see it in my mind. I could visualize it. And so, you know, you cross that threshold. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I just thought this is going to be another fun trip. Something good's going to happen. You know, it's going to be a feel-good thing. And it was a trap. It was a trap. And those gateways are a trap because they look good, they feel good, they sound good, they're fun, but you can get, and I had done a lot of drugs before that and hadn't gone through that door. But I must have reached some peak point in my life where, and I think in a sense I did, because everything around me had crashed. I was just ready to go. I was ready to just let go. And that's what I did. I let down all my defenses, and boom, there they were.
Yeah, the most dangerous drug I saw while I was working psych in the prison was amphetamine. You know, I saw more prisoners had gone psychotic on amphetamine than any other drug.
Really?
I mean, and they were hearing voices, and these voices would tell them where to go, when to be there when they ran out of drugs. And they would go there, and some stranger would show up with more amphetamine. You know, the prisoners called amphetamine the devil's drug. And you look at what the government is doing, you know, as up until now, they're letting tons of that stuff come across the border.
Yeah.
Tons of it. And there's a lot more people going to go psychotic on that stuff and become non-functional citizens. It tells you a little bit about this previous administration.
Yeah. Actually, we, very interestingly, where we live, we saw it played out in a person that is like lived near us, and we watched it happen. And, you know, when you're really sensitive to energy, like I can feel the parasites, the entities, the demons, whatever you want to call them, like in people and surrounding them. And she now is in the system, and it completely broke within 6 months. And it's devastating. It's just devastating to see happen.
Yeah,
have you ever read the book Girl Interrupted? Do you remember that book, Girl Interrupted?
I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie.
In that book, her first chapter, she talks about the door. I read that book and I was stunned. I didn't know anybody else had ever experienced the door. But she talks about coming upon this door in her mind and saying, okay, and opening that door. And then the door shut behind her and she was trapped. She was
Wow.
mentally, emotionally trapped. I'd never heard anybody say that before. And I read that and I went, wow, okay, apparently this door is a thing that they use on people. And I suppose they use whatever is convenient for them to use on whatever person that they have, whatever will lure them. I was always looking for something more fun or a better high, so there was that lure of that door. Come through this door, there's something even more there.
Right.
So, does that kind of answer that?
Yeah.
The question about, going across that
Totally.
threshold.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just feel like that's really, for some reason, that's really powerful for people to feel into and to know, so that, especially on these experiences, I think about it all the time, when there's something like ayahuasca, that's a wild, and, it matches the plant. Like it's, a crazy, and indoors, outdoors, and you can pretty much travel anywhere. And, without the right protective shaman healer, in the space, that's scary stuff. I just think that people need to really be very aware of what's possible when our consciousness is, vibrating at different speeds, and we're able to go into different travel astrally, if we will, through these doors and such. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, and I think that there is an invitation, and I think people take the invitation, and that's when they go over the edge. And they may not even realize that they've taken the invitation, but they've taken it. And you give yourself over to that, and then you belong to them. And that was very clear. It was very clear to me that my life was over. And my big worry was, I was in college and I was flunking out. And my worry was, where am I going to go? How am I going to live? How am I going to work? How am I going to make money? And around that time when I flunked out of college, my dad disowned me because he thought I was playing a game. He thought I was just trying to get attention. And he didn't like the fact that I was a disruption in his life. And so he told me, don't come home until you straighten this out. You can act right. And so I had nothing. I had no family. I had nothing. And I went through this this started in about October of 71. And I got free of it about April of 74. So I lived with this for a long time. And most of that time I was in college, and then about 1 year out of college. And so, I tried to navigate both worlds, but I couldn't concentrate to study. I was exhausted, so I couldn't get to class. I was completely whacked out on these drugs. So you're just a zombie. Yeah. And I was at the same time, trying to live a life and find an escape. And I spent a lot of time in my head trying to figure out how to escape. I mean, that becomes your whole thing, is how am I going to escape out of this? But there is none, but you spin in that wheel all day, all night. How am I going to escape? How am I going to get out? You think, I'll try this, I'll try that. But there's no answer. And the psychiatrist, you go and, again, he'd ask you, are you suicidal or are you homicidal? And he'd give you the drugs. In fact, Jerry, they gave me my drugs for free. The county mental health center, they didn't even make me pay for my drugs. I go in, they just give me 3 bottles of pills.
Wow.
And they just give me tons of them. I mean, I had bottles and bottles and bottles that they'd give me. I had, in fact, when I left college and went to Syracuse, I had enough pills that lasted me almost a whole year. That's how many they gave me. It was just, it was like half some. So I never paid for any of them. And I often wondered if they were using the kids that came in there that had problems like I did. I wonder if they were just using us to collect data. If we were just the guinea pigs. I'm convinced we were. I'm convinced we were the guinea pigs.
Yeah, they're putting more and more kids on these antipsychotic drugs. There's tens of thousands of them now. And it destroys your brain.
Yeah. And your body. The health,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
vitality.
yeah,
Yeah.
with time. I mean, these
Time.
drugs do not cure anything. Nothing.
No.
They don't cure anything. They don't fix anything. They just, like Judy said, they just dumb you down and turn you into a zombie. They're like major tranquilizers. They just calm you down. Now the voices don't like them because they don't want you calmed down. They want the person paranoid and, frantic and anxious, and that's what they feed off of. So you'll find that psychiatrists are being assaulted at a rate higher than virtually any other doctor. The schizophrenics are constantly attacking them because what the voices tell the patient is that he's poisoning you. The psychiatrist is poisoning you. Look at all these nasty symptoms, these effects of these drugs. You're being poisoned, and in effect, they are.
Yeah, that part's actually true, but
Yeah.
they're
Well,
not saying it for helping reasons. No.
Well, there's a physical element to this too. And you were talking about that friend you could feel, you could sense. And with these entities, with all that's going on in the mind, there's a physical element. There's the pressure on the head, the pressure on the body. There's a darkness. There's a feeling of such horrible darkness and despair.
Mm.
You can just physically feel the oppression, and that never leaves. That's on you all the time. The voices and the thoughts may come and go at times. And it's interesting because at one point, I went to visit family, and while I was visiting family, everything calmed down. It all calmed down. The minute I left, it was like a firestorm. It all started up again. I've never been able to figure out why, when I went to visit family, that it all calmed down, but it did. Never made sense to me. So you're dealing with the mental, and you're dealing with the sense that your life is over, and Natalie, at some point you're going to die. That's the only way out. And they make that very clear to you. That is the only way out. That's the only way you get out. They never talked about killing me, but they talked to me a lot about killing myself. And I thought a lot about it. And ultimately, when I flunked out of college, I did try. I was living in a sorority house for the summer, not knowing what I was going to do, where I was going to go. I had no money. College was over. My father didn't want me. I had nowhere to go, so I tried to gas myself with my car.
Mm.
And a friend of mine saved me. She just had a sense that something was going on. She followed me outside. And so I went to my psychiatrist and I told him, I'm going to kill myself because there is no way out. And I asked him to get me on a rehab program so I could go to Syracuse and go to like a 4-month secretarial course so that I could get my typing skills up and I could at least get a job and I could pay my bills. I could survive. I'd be surviving at a very low poverty level, but I would be surviving. And he agreed to do that. He agreed to let me, he got me on it was called DVR at the time, Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, so that they also gave me some money, enough to pay rent and food. That's about all you got. And so I moved and I went to live in a house with some Christian women at Syracuse University, right near the campus there. And I went there with all this junk on me. And I realized when I got there that nothing had changed. And you tend to think, I'll move, things will change. Well, you get to the new destination, it hasn't changed. In fact, now it's worse because now you're in an environment we don't know anybody. So you've got all that stress on top of it. And so I decided I needed to get some help. And I went to a local psych hospital and knocked on the door and asked them if they would help me, asked the psychiatrist. And he talked to me and told me no, he couldn't help me and I couldn't come in. And then he decided after talking to me that he would see me, he'd break the rules and he would let me come a couple of days a week and see him. And then when I went to see him after once or twice, he set me up with this counselor, this guy named Conrad, who was fresh out of, I think he'd just gotten his bachelor's degree. I don't even think he was, I don't know what the qualifications were at that point to be a counselor, but he didn't have a master's. And it was the only thing that I could think to do was find somebody that I could talk to, because I didn't know, at least I thought, at least if I had a counselor, I'd have somebody to talk to, because the women that I lived with, they just thought I was kind of a nasty person.
Judy, what were you thinking the voices were up to that point?
I thought they were me. I thought that I was playing out my self-image in my head constantly, that I was nothing, that I'd never be anything, that I had failed, that I had done a lot of things wrong. And I as a teenager, I'd done a lot of things I shouldn't have done. So I had a lot of guilt, and I had tremendous amount of shame for the state of mind and the state of life I was in. That shame was so overwhelming. So I was very defensive with people because I had all that stuff playing out all the time, that I'm not good enough. And so people could really easily trigger me, and I could get sort of nasty. And so my roommates thought I was sort of nasty. And I went, so I went and I was seeing this counselor, and then I flunked out of the secretarial school, but they found me a job at a daily newspaper in Syracuse, and I worked on the copy desk, typing computer codes when they were going to computer type. And then one day the counselor got very angry at me because he kept wanting me to talk about how I felt. And I had never as a kid been allowed to feel anything negative. My dad wouldn't tolerate negative feelings, and he wouldn't tolerate too many happy feelings. And so all my life, all I'd done, every time I felt negative, I'd press it down and I wouldn't feel it. I'd bury it so that I wouldn't have to deal with it, because I was scared to death of negative feelings. And so I didn't even recognize what they were. So when he was asking me, how do you feel? I didn't know how I felt. I'd say, well, I don't know, because I didn't know. I did not know how I felt, other than I was completely overwhelmed and nuts. I knew that. I knew I was nuts. And so he got angry at me one day because he said, well, if you're not going to talk about how you feel, if you're not going to talk about any of this stuff, then I can't help you. He said, so you have to decide. And I said, I don't know how to do this. He says, well, I'll help you. And I said, but I don't know how to do this. He said, well, you think about this. He left the room. He came back 10 minutes later. He said, are you willing to follow me on this? And he had decided that my biggest problem was that I was full of anger and resentment. I think he found what he could deal with. He couldn't deal with the schizophrenia. He couldn't deal with the voices. But he could deal with the things that he found: my anger, my resentment, my bitterness, my unforgiveness. I had so much unforgiveness towards my family and friends who'd blown me off and boyfriends who'd blown me off. I was a negative emotional time bomb, basically. And so he came back in the room and I said, I don't know how to do this, but I'll try. I want to try. So he began to get me to talk about my childhood and my childhood trauma and the things that had happened. And these emotions started coming out. And it was like a horrible explosion every time I saw him. It was so hard because what I always say is they go down like warm water and they come up like glass. Like shattered glass, these emotions do when you buried them. They go down pretty easy, and I could push them down almost to a physical level. I think I actually pushed them down in some places into a DNA level, because I actually, in a lot of ways, destroyed my nervous system during this period. I have some problems now with my nervous system. Could be the drugs too, Jerry. I don't know. And so when that stuff started coming up, it was explosive and it was horrible. And it was scary. It was so frightening. But he worked me through all my childhood trauma that we could get to, that we could find. And I found out later in life there were more layers, but he at least got me through the top layer. And I began to get this junk out of me, which is, I think that those entities had set me up to create situations that they knew I couldn't deal with, so I would bury, and they had helped mold me and framed me into this person. I was groomed. I was groomed by these at a very young age. So Conrad was helping me ungroom, get all this out that I pushed down. And we went through this for months, and I would cry and cry and cry and cry. And then what happened, Natalie, is I began to feel like a person. I began to feel I had value as this stuff got out. And I didn't realize at the time, and I've thought about this a lot the past couple of months since I met Jerry, that those months with Conrad were the real groundwork of getting free. That was the beginning of healing. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of healing, because they feed on that negative garbage. And as I was getting this negative garbage out, they had less and less to feed on. So they were less and less active in my life. And I could begin to feel myself again. And it was an amazing thing because it's like, you know how it is that there are days, I know I have days now, I'll be riding the car and I feel good. And I put a song on and I'm singing, I'm dancing, and I feel good and it's good to be alive. There are none of those days in schizophrenia. There is never any feeling good. And when I started feeling good, when I had a day where I felt good, I thought, okay, I'm on to something. I'm on to something. I'm going to keep going. And around that time, while I was living in this house, I was going to this charismatic Methodist church at Syracuse University. And this woman came to speak from Philadelphia, Reverend Evelyn Carter. And she'd been on some Christian network. She was pretty well known. She had a book out. I didn't know anything about it. I don't remember what she said, but I sensed that she could help me. So when church was over, I went home and I called one of the elders and I asked if I could come talk to her. And they said, sure, come on over. So I went over. And by this time I was beginning to feel better. I still had I still had a lot of the negative stuff about myself, and I still had the attacks where you have moments where it's on you. It's overwhelming, and you just breathe your way through it until it lets up a little bit. I was still having some of that, but at least I had a sense that somebody inside me was alive, that I was alive. And so I went to talk to her, and I started telling her what was going on. And she listened to me for a minute or two, and she put her hand up, and she said, stop. And I said, what? She says, I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you what you're dealing with. And I thought, okay. And she said, you're dealing with demons. They're demons. And they're talking to you, and they're telling you this, and they're trying to destroy you. And she told me, they come to kill, steal, and destroy, and you are the target. And she said to me, are you a Christian? I said, yes, I'm a Christian. And she said, well, then they have no right to your life. They can't take your life. I said, and I'm thinking, well, they have taken my life. And and I don't remember the whole conversation, but she said, I'll teach you how to fight. I'll teach you how to get rid of them. And she
Judy, what did you think when she told you that? Because a lot of people are terrified of the truth, that these things are demons. They don't want to hear that. I had to be very careful with that information.
Yeah, I wasn't so afraid of that because I had been a Christian for a while. I was a terrible Christian. As a matter of fact, I thought Jesus was a weakling. This is what they told me. He was a weakling. He let people kill him. Why are you reading the book, this guy's book who allowed people to kill him? What kind of religion is this? This is a religion for wimps. But I had read enough of the Bible to know that, and to believe, I did believe demons existed. And I did see in scripture that Jesus could cast out demons in a word. He could cast them out and they were gone. And he did a lot of it. I knew he did a lot of it. So I wasn't so much afraid of that, but I was terrified by what I was going to have to do to get rid of him because I had no power. I knew I had no power. I had never experienced the power of God. I didn't even know really that in this day and age that God had any power. I knew the power of prayer, but not the power over this kind of stuff. So I was sort of terrified. And at the same time, I was thinking, well, if this doesn't work, it's over. There's nothing else. This is it. I really did believe that. And at the same time, I was kind of like, okay, okay, we'll see if this works. But I had nothing else. So I said, okay. So she said, when these attacks come, take out this little book. And the book was broken into sections. Are you fearful? Do you have worries? Are you sick? She said, find the section that for whatever you're dealing with, it's fear or worry, whatever. She said, read the scripture out loud to them and tell them, I belong to Jesus Christ. You don't own me. You have to go. In the name of Jesus, I'm commanding you to go. Get out of here. And that's where I thought, oh boy, it can't be that simple. It can't be that simple. It can't be that easy. But I thought, okay, I'll try it. So I took my little pocket promise book with me and I went to work the next day, or even that day it might have been. And I'm sitting at the copy desk and these attacks would come and, the pressure and the thoughts, and it would just overwhelm me. So I grabbed my little book and I ran to the ladies' room and locked myself in a stall. And I stood there and took out the book and I started reading about scriptures about fear. And then I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, go, because you don't own me and you can't do this to me. I belong to Jesus. And like that, boom, they left. And the whole dimension my head was in, had been in for 3 years, left. It broke. So at that moment, I was allowed to come out of that door and slam it behind me because I was free. But they tested me for a couple months. So I went through several months of doing this, sometimes once a day, sometimes probably 10 times a day. But once I realized that I had power and I had authority, and I learned later, it says in the Bible that God's given us authority over all the power of the enemy and nothing will hurt us. I had never heard that, didn't know it, didn't even realize it then. I didn't read that till many years later. But once I realized I had authority, I had power in Jesus' name, it was like, okay, I'm going to go to the end with this. I'm going to fight this out to the end. And I did. And little by little, over a period of a couple of months, it got less and it got less and it got less and it got less. And then my counselor said, well, and I didn't tell him what I was doing. I didn't tell him I was reading scripture to demons. I didn't think he'd get that part. So finally, but I was doing better. And he said, you need to get off the drugs. And that terrified me. I thought, oh my God, if I get off these drugs, what's going to happen to me? What if this all comes back? What if? I went into a state of complete panic, terror, and fear. And I lived in that for, a couple of days. And then I thought, you know what? Why not? I've gotten this far. I don't want to be on these drugs forever. I'm going to do it. So I did it. And it took about 2-3 days. I don't remember exactly how long. And I went through terrible withdrawals with shaky and sweating and fear and anxiety attacks. And then I woke up on Easter morning in 1974. And I got up that morning and started to get on my life to go to church. And I realized it was all gone. The drugs had cleared. All that fogginess from the drugs, all that, because they just pull you down into slow kind of snail mode emotionally, and they dull your emotions so much that there's nothing bright in your life. There's nothing that pops. It's all very dull. There's no color. And I woke up that morning and the color in my life was back, and my mind was free, and my body was free, and I was free. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked, but I was so thankful. I can't tell you how thankful I was to get free, because I didn't think I would ever get out of that. And then I was able to get on with my life and begin to build a life. But I had to, Natalie, still deal with a lot of the trauma and triggers, because there still was stuff that went off. So you learn that. And there was still spiritual warfare, because they're around. They're whispering in everybody's ear. They will come and tell you all kinds of things in moments. You walk into the room and they'll think, oh, everybody's looking at you. I've learned that all negative thoughts come from them. All
from them.
thoughts.
And all of us are being hit.
Yeah.
Nobody escapes it.
For a while, they had me convinced, as I was going through this process of getting out of my life, for a while I was convinced that some of the negative was them and some of them was me. It took me a long time to realize that everything negative was from them. So now in my life, anything negative comes, I just tear it down, dismiss it. I say, nope, not coming in, goodbye. I don't allow anything negative to dwell in my thoughts. And I've learned that if something comes and I just tear it down in the name of Jesus, tell it go, be gone, not going to entertain you. And if they've come and they bring with it emotion, which some of it does, will bring the negative emotion with the negative thought, the negative emotion will go as well. If I put in something good instead, and I start thinking on the good things, what is good and right and true and honorable and pure, if I start focusing on that, usually within less than a minute, the thoughts change and the emotions change. But it's taken, it's taken a lifetime to figure and unravel all this. Because after the voices were gone and I was out of that dimension, I still had so much in my life to deal with, because they train you, they groom you to think. So then you've got to change all your thinking. And that became my life work, was changing all my thinking. And I had so many negative opinions about myself and about other people. I was a total kind of negative blob when I got out of that. So I had to start rebuilding my mind, basically, because they
Yeah.
had, to some degree, they had shattered parts of me. They'd not me, but they'd shattered the truth. They'd shattered the truth of who I was. So I had to rediscover that. And that's why I say to people, if you want to come out of schizophrenia, it's a job. It's a full-time job for a while to be restored to who you really are, to become who you really are, and to tear down all that negative stuff. But once you get out of their power and you get out of them running your life, then you're free to heal. So you deal with the spiritual first, and you eliminate the spiritual garbage, then you can deal with the healing.
Yeah.
Which is what I did. And
Judy,
I went on.
do you have any question that these things were negative demonic entities? Do you have any doubt about that at all?
No.
Neither do I.
You can feel them. Well, Jerry, you felt them. You can feel them.
I've felt them. They're icky electrical feeling.
Yeah. You can feel their presence, and they press down and they oppress physically as well as emotionally and mentally. Like now, if I go through a spiritual battle, there are times you go through a spiritual battle and they'll paralyze your mind. And your mind will be paralyzed until you push them out again, and then mind's clear again. So I know, I have no doubt. At first, I didn't know what they were, but no, I had no doubt.
And what do you think about psychiatry telling the world that these are auditory hallucinations, that they don't exist?
Well, they're very smart if they're hallucinations. They're very cogent, and they're very deliberate, and they're very
sentient.
Yeah,
sentient.
They have a program.
Yes.
They, the devil sifts us. He knows us. He knows all our weaknesses. When I allowed these things to come into my life, they already knew all my weaknesses. They knew exactly how to destroy me. And they went for every weakness in my life. They knew that I was traumatized. They knew that I had a bad self-image. They knew that I could be suicidal. They knew everything about me, and they played on that methodically and very intelligently to wear me down, to the point that by the time I got to Syracuse, I didn't have much life in me. If something hadn't changed in Syracuse, I would have been gone by the end of that year. I would not have been able, physically or mentally, to survive. So they have a very intelligent program, and it's very, very deliberate for each person for exactly how they can take them down.
And it runs fixed patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's running fixed patterns, they can't be hallucinations, as the psychiatric mafia has hoodwinked the entire planet to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and this is what continues to keep that system of, I would say, I have a lot of different, words of inorganic, synthetic, horrific, low frequency. People say black magic, however you want to put it, to keep those systems running, is by continuously telling people that this is all in your mind, it's you're broken, and you need to own it. Like, own your shit, essentially, when it's like, I'm sorry, that is not mine. That is not mine. And especially when you think, like, back when you were saying, the trauma that you were born into, that how it's the grooming of keeping generations, keeping lineages, I would say, in that trauma consistently. So, I would look at you and say, you are a cycle breaker that broke that lineage, and you freed your lineage really from that trauma that could have been looping. It's like a looping pattern, of that lineage. Which is not just like a whole other layer to it.
And if you look at these patterns and you compare them to what we've been being hit with by the mainstream media over decades and decades, they're the exact same patterns. What's coming out of the mainstream media is the same kind of stuff that schizophrenics hear. Total negativity, anti-religious stuff. They're burning down churches all over France right now. They foster and create negative feelings and fear and paranoia.
Yep,
It's the same patterns.
it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah. The thing too that I want to tell you, Natalie, for people who are listening, there is, and Jerry did mention this real briefly, there is a tremendous aloneness,
Mm,
a tremendous being kind of cordoned off from the rest of the world, where you're in this world by yourself and nobody can get in, and you can't let anybody get in, and nobody can touch you. Nobody can touch your heart. People can tell you they love you. You can't even feel it. You can't feel
mhm.
any of the good emotions coming at you. You can't feel the love. I had friends who loved me, thought I was the greatest thing. And to me, I was like a rock. I could not
Mm,
feel it. I could not receive it. I think that aloneness itself is one of the most horrendous parts, because
yep,
that aloneness is as much a torment as the fear is, because you're abandoned. It's what, like Jerry was saying one time, abandon hope all who enter here. You do. You're totally abandoned, and you've abandoned hope. And the psychiatric community is feeding you despair, pills and despair.
yep,
That's their prescription. And and you live on that to some degree. When that first happened, I mean, I got into it. Okay, I'm schizophrenic. Let's get into it. It was like, and there's nothing for me. Okay, well, let's explore that. Let's go with that. It was like a game at first. It's like, oh, now I have an answer. Now I know what I am. I'm schizophrenic. I thought that my personality had shattered into a lot of different, and these voices were parts of me that had broken off, that were talking to me to try to put me back together. There was no way they could have put me back together. They were all negative. But
right.
that loneliness, that being alone, that having nobody to help you, that being abandoned by, not because people choose to abandon, but because of the dimension you're in, you're totally abandoned. I can't explain
Yeah,
what that is like for people. And it is worth doing whatever you have to do to get out of it, to get out of that. I would never, ever again want to experience that.
Judy, do you feel that your psychiatrist that you dealt with, did they have any idea of what you were truly going through?
No, and he didn't seem that interested in knowing, Jerry.
Yeah, they didn't ask any questions. They're not
No,
curious.
no, he wanted to
it's
know. He wanted to know, was I suicidal or homicidal that
That's
week,
it. Yep.
and did I need pills? And basically, okay, you're still in the same place, and okay, everything's the same. They just want to make sure everything's the same, that you're not going to go out and kill yourself or kill somebody else. That's really the big thing.
Did he ever try to understand what was going on with you?
He was so convinced that it was a chemical,
Imbalance.
imbalance.
A lie that he'd been told.
That's what he'd been told, and he had worked on a ward with schizophrenic women at Marcy State Hospital in upstate New York, and so that's what he'd been told, and so that's all he believed. And he knew
Yeah.
he knew he wasn't going to fix me, and he told me, you're going to have to live with this, learn to live with it. And that learning to live with it part is such a damning statement. Learn
Yes.
to live with it.
Yes. Very
yeah,
hopeless.
It is a hopeless, damning statement. It's the worst thing you can tell somebody.
Yeah.
yep,
That there is no hope.
Yeah.
yep. And they're so quick to, this happens in all of the medical communities, the mainstream medical communities. We could talk about hospitals in the same regard. It's what's the diagnosis? Let's at
Yeah.
least, and it's just symptom, 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 instead of looking at, hey, is anybody at, like, Jerry, this is why, I really, loved your energy of like, whoa, 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 whoa. Why? Just one question.
Yeah.
Can we
Why?
please
Yeah.
ask why?
Mhm.
Why is there
And,
inflammation? Why is this person hearing voices? What are these? I mean, like, it's
and,
like
and,
it's like all of common sense is just ripped out of these people's souls.
right.
It's
And why
crazy.
don't they ever ask the questions? Where do thoughts come from?
Mhm.
Right.
They never ask that question. They never investigate that question. They never
Exactly.
research it. They don't even bring it up. They just assume they're all from you. They're not.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So
Well,
anybody who's who's going to recover from schizophrenia needs to understand that these voices are not them. They don't belong to them.
Exactly.
That they're something coming in from the outside. If you keep thinking it's you and you believe the lies psychiatry says, you're never going to recover.
Exactly. Well, and the spiritual community sometimes isn't much better in that regard because again, it's taking, I've heard this said so many times, and I've heard people regurgitate the words of saying, if you're in this state of negativity, you created it. You created it all. So it's on you and you need to take responsibility. And while there's a lot of truths in that in some degree, it's also like, well, wait a minute. What is happening? What's really the situation? Are there voices that are coming in that are ripping and anchoring that soul into all of the lowest of low frequencies and conscious, feelings like again, anger, despair, hopelessness, all of that stuff. And that often is not looked at either, even
No,
in, what should be more of that conversation around open-mindedness and open-heartedness to really see what is really happening here.
Right. Yeah. And what are the voices saying? You won't find any of them. They have no interest whatsoever in what these voices are telling schizophrenics. If they did, they would see the same patterns that I found. They're repeatable, consistent patterns. They don't change. It's like these voices were made in some cosmic cookie cutter somewhere with the same program.
Right.
Well, and they don't deal with anything being spiritual. They don't accept the spiritual realm. I mean, in the time that the New Testament was written, it was common. They were casting demons out. There were people who were tormented. There were people who were crazy, foaming at the mouth. There were people crawling around on their hands and knees. It was so common, and it was known. It was known that there were demonic entities that were affecting these people. But psychiatry and medicine, they don't deal with the spiritual realm.
Right.
And this is a spiritual problem. It is a spiritual
It is. It's
problem.
A spiritual battle.
It's a spiritual battle. It's a spiritual problem. And, until I got past all that negative junk that I had stored up in me, until I got rid of all that stuff, nobody could have convinced me that this wasn't just all me, and that it was just that I had shattered and I was a mess and I was crazy. I was convinced I was crazy. I mean, I go around and tell people I was crazy. I'm crazy. One year when I went back to school, and I had a roommate, and I had my pills on my dresser, and she goes, "Oh, what's that for?" I said, "Well, I'm crazy. I'm schizophrenic." Well, she about dropped her teeth.
Yeah.
I think she wanted to go find a new roommate. I said, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." But, there was no convincing me that it wasn't me and I wasn't nuts until I could begin again to feel something of my heart and something of my spirit, something of my innermost part. And when I could feel that and realize that there's a part of me that's totally intact, then I realized maybe this isn't just me. Maybe this isn't just me. Maybe I didn't make all this happen. And that's why, Jerry, when I met that woman from Philadelphia, it was like, hey, this could be it. This could be it. And it was it. She knew exactly how to deal with it.
These things are energetic. They're negative energetic beings. They can go into your mind. They can see all the rotten stuff that you've done, and they can throw it in your face. So what psychiatry is doing is it's like getting a magnetic field on a big magnet and dumping Thorazine and Mellaril and all those drugs on that magnetic field, and thinking they're going to get rid of that magnetic field. This is an energetic illness. It's a spiritual illness. It's not going to go away by dumping drugs on the magnetic field. It may gum up that magnetic field and weaken it temporarily, but it's not going to cure the problem.
No. And if anything, again, make it worse, because then you can't even get out of that feeling of like that miasma, that goo that's just like, covering the ability to even deal on any level or layer, really.
Yeah, they're doing a lot more damage in the long run than they're doing good. More people recover without those drugs than they do with them. It's lie after lie after lie that they're perpetuating on the planet.
Right.
Psychiatry and Big Pharma are one of the most diabolical organizations there is on this planet.
Yeah. Yeah, and that list is long. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
list of diabolical
What were you going to
government.
say, Natalie? You were going to say something.
Oh yeah, I really loved a moment that you explained that I think would be really powerful to tap into before we close, because I know we could talk for a very, very long time. I mean, this is powerful wisdom. So again, I'll kind of from my lens, like hearing you, it was like when you cracked open, like you cracked out of out of that low realm, that low frequency realm of, I mean, that's what I think, we've called hell, right? It's
Mhm.
really,
Yeah.
but call it whatever, low realm, low frequency realm. And you felt that crack and you felt like, I would say, divine love being poured in of like, oh, hi, I am a soul and I am here.
Mhm.
Maybe you could talk about that for a moment, and how that just lifted everything in your spirit as much as you can remember.
One thing that I didn't talk about that fits in with this is that I went through a period while I was in counseling of forgiving.
Mm,
And I don't know why it was such a big thing, but for me, the forgiving, my parents for what they'd done, my brother and sisters for what I felt they had done, the people who stood by. Big one for me was the people who stood by when I was a kid and knew that I was sinking and did nothing. School
mm,
counselor, teachers. I had one friend whose mother helped me. She'd let me get out. She'd let me come stay with them for a week and get out of the house so I could get grounded again. But when I went through that period of forgiveness, that forgiveness that was the beginning of the crack. When I let go of my hatred, and I hated a lot of people. I mean, I was bitter and hateful towards a lot of people, and especially towards a lot of the people who didn't really understand what I've been going through, who didn't like me. But when you're schizophrenic, and I always say, when you're nuts, you do nutty things and you say stupid things, and they don't understand where you're coming from because you're never consistent. You can be one thing one day and something else the next day. They never know you're unpredictable. And I had a hard time with the people. There are still people that I could contact now on Facebook who knew me back then. If I contacted them, would just say, "I'm sorry, I don't really want to have a discussion with you." And so there was a lot of stigma. A lot of it I brought on my own. A lot of it was just they don't understand. But that forgiveness and letting those people go, freeing them. But basically, I was freeing myself from them and freeing myself from all that unforgiveness. That was, Natalie, that was the biggest crack. And
mm,
after that went the resentment and the bitterness and the hatred. That all came after that. But that forgiveness was so huge. And that's where the light came in. That forgiveness
mm,
brought light. It opened the door, cracked open the door. And when that light comes in and you see that there is life and that you still have life in you and you're still alive and you're a soul and you're good, then it gets easier to crack that door. Then it gets easier to start tearing this other stuff down because you think, okay, this is good. If I have to sit and cry 2 hours a day, 3 times a week in order to get to the good, I'll do it. And you do it. But the thing I've seen with people who are dealing with this kind of stuff, they fear the things that they're going to have to go through to get well. They fear it.
yeah,
They fear it. And so they run from it because it's work. I mean, Jerry knows that.
A
It
lot of
is
work.
it's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. I have spent my whole life just as things have come up that have negative, tearing them down. And it never seems to end. But I think that's probably true of all this. There's always something coming. But I still find things inside me. Like the other day, I went to a Bible study and I'm sitting in the room and I thought, I don't fit in. And I thought, well, where did that come from? And I thought, oh, so I followed it. I don't fit in because I'm overweight. I don't fit in because I have a bad background. I don't fit in. And I listed all the things, and then I just tore them down. And I said, no, I'm not going to have that anymore. But I still find those things because there was so much buried, it still comes up. And so that's kind of my life work. I mean, it's not like I do it every minute, every day. Maybe once or twice a month, something will pop up like that. And I'll go, oh, isn't that interesting?
What I found is these things are consummate liars.
Mhm.
They will tell you any lie that you will buy.
Mhm.
And the purpose of the lies is to generate that negative emotional energy that they can suck off you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use the That's a Lie program on my website, that helps normal people too, because 98% of that garbage coming into your mind is abject lies, just like Judy was saying. Oh, I'm too fat, or I'm dead, or I don't belong here. It's all lies.
Mhm.
So if you
Yeah.
confront those lies and say that's a lie, then you're not resisting it. Because if
Mhm.
you're resisting, it takes your energy. But if you know it's a lie, they can't get their claws in you. You just say,
Yeah,
that's a lie. Get out of my face.
Mhm. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Strong boundaries, strong boundaries and that's, I really see this as every one of those lies is just trying to strip the divine
Mhm.
source, God, creator, like out of us, and
Oh,
to
yeah.
to close off from the light more and more and more.
Yeah.
So
So one
yeah,
of the first things I
absolutely.
noticed at the state hospital is these things were anti-religious. They absolutely hated the 23rd Psalm. One patient told me when I repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They hated 23rd Psalm. They hated Psalm 91. They didn't like these guys reading the Bible. They didn't like them going to church. What kind of hallucination would do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fact, again, like you said, so how is it everyone has the same exact hallucination? That's handy. That's
Yeah, they
so
run
it's
the
all
same patterns.
coincidental. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
they run the same patterns over and over.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and they have a personality. I mean, I knew that when the voices first started talking to me. Of the four voices, they had distinct personalities. They were individuals. That was what was so confusing. That's why I thought, okay, I've shattered. Now I'm four people plus me. So now I'm five people. I'm not one because they're distinct personalities. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the personalities and the parts of them that were me and what parts of me went with what personality because I was convinced it was me. And it was quite something to discover that I wasn't shattered.
Mm.
To spend all that time thinking I'm shattered, I'm destroyed, and then realizing, no, the shattering is what's going on outside, it's what's working on me. It's not what's in me and coming out. It's what's being laid on me every day is that shattering.
Which is the opposite of what psychiatry is telling the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Which is literally the exact opposite.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, is there any other final thoughts before we close that you'd like to drop in? I mean, I'm sure there's lots, but
Well, yeah, there's a new psychotherapy that came out. It's an energetic psychotherapy. It's called the MACE energy system.
Mm-hmm.
It works. It will get rid of a lot of this stuff permanently. That doesn't get
Mm-hmm.
rid of schizophrenia, but it will get rid of the stuff that these things feed off of. So
Mm.
before you go taking any of these toxic psychiatric drugs, go to causisminstitute.com and see if you can't find a MACE therapist there. It's CAUSISM institute.com. There's a list of them there. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Judy, for you?
My last thought is this. There is freedom from this. For me, it's Christianity, it's Christ. Scripture says Christ came to set the captives free. And I was a captive. I was a captive. And I asked and I asked and I asked and I prayed for freedom and he gave it to me. If he did it for me, he'll do it for anyone. With the
Mm-hmm.
caveat that it's work. It is work. Some people think, you get a magic wand, boom, boom, you're going to be better. That's not how life works. That's not how anything in life works. It's
Yeah.
not how this works. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes work. It takes commitment. It takes real commitment, but it can be done.
Yes.
It can be done.
It,
And
it,
I've met
it,
so many people who they're so afraid to go there. I have one friend who's mentally ill. He's not schizophrenic, but he's got some problems. And when I explained to him, because I wrote a book about getting free, and sent him a copy of the book, and he got so mad at me. He got so
Oh,
mad at me for telling him that he could get free, because that meant he would lose his disability,
mm,
and he would lose his identity, and he would lose his ability to play the games that he plays with people, because he's a big game player. And he just cut me out of his life. He did not want to hear it. Didn't want to hear it
mm,
because he was enjoying his sickness too much. But I know there's people out there that want to get free. There is freedom. Ask.
Yeah,
Ask.
it is not a life sentence as psychiatry is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
You can break out of it, but
right.
the eventual you're going to have to turn into a positive spiritual direction and stay there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's
Absolutely.
that's the bottom line. It's kind of
Yeah,
like Judy's story.
yeah,
You have to realize that there is a God, there is Jesus, there's guardian angels. They're there to help you. You have to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
And if you seek, he will respond. People say to me, well, how do you know? How do you know? And I said, because he says, if you seek me with all my heart, you'll find me. If you seek him with all your heart, you're going to find him. I sought with all my heart. I cried out. I found him. And I was determined to get well. I didn't like being mentally ill. I didn't like it. I didn't like anything about it. I had plans for my life. There were things I wanted to do. I wanted to have a family, and I didn't want this taking everything I had. And they take everything you have. And
yeah,
that's why I fought, because I didn't want less than what I dreamed my life could be. And this stuff wants you to give up all your dreams. They want you to give up, abandon hope. Don't abandon hope. So I say to people, don't give up.
Never.
yeah.
Give up.
Is Judy, your book available? Can people?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. I have a website, and they can go there and they can read a sample chapter if they want.
Oh,
It's a Christian
beautiful.
book, so some people might like that and some people might not. So I tell them ahead of time. But my website is strategiesforovercomers.com, and it's just a book
Beautiful.
about becoming mature and learning how to fight these battles, and learning how to manage your own mind, and how to manage
Yes.
your emotions, and how to manage your life. So yeah,
Beautiful.
they can read a sample chapter and they can click through there to Amazon.
Cool. Brilliant. Yeah, and it takes bravery and courage, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I was riding in the car today and I was thinking, God, why me? Why me? And you know what the answer I got? The answer was, you asked. And I thought, well, that just seems so darn simple. But I asked and I asked and I asked and I asked and I asked.
Yes.
So
Yes. Ask and you shall receive, right? That's
yeah,
how that goes as well. Yeah.
yeah. Might not come in the
Beautiful.
package you expect it, you know. But I think that's true of life with anything. Nothing is what we think it's going to be. It'll come in its own way.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and if you want to find how Sherry and I came to the conclusion that these voices are not hallucinations, but are actual entities, you can go to my website. And I don't see myself, so I don't know if you guys can see this.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's a good book.
It's,
I've read it. It's a great
It
book.
is.
yeah. It'll tell you for certain these things are not hallucinations like psychiatry says they are.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. And there now, this is the beauty. There are resources and places for people to go to know that they're not alone in
Mm-hmm.
this. And, that's the beautiful thing about coming together in conversations like today. So thank you so much for doing this, especially on a Saturday
Oh,
and taking
Yeah.
our time.
well, thanks for
Sure.
having me. I'm really thankful you let me tell my story, and I hope even if it helps one person, it's worth it. And I hope it
Great.
does.
It
Absolutely.
will. It
It
will.
will. It will.
Yeah. It
Well,
takes a
thank you
lot of
both.
courage to do what you're doing.
It does.
Well, it's nerve-wracking, I'll tell you that. It is
Yeah.
it is nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's being vulnerable too, and that's another layer and level. I think that, just being vulnerable and open to talk about all of this is so vital, because then people know, oh, wait a minute. That resonates with me. I need
Yes.
to know more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. You'll be helping
it's helping.
thousands and thousands of people, Judy.
Yeah.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you.
They can feel your sincerity.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want anybody to have to go there and spend time there,
Yeah.
No.
It is a hell. Like Natalie said, it is hell.
Yeah.
It is hell. And nobody should spend time in hell.
Exactly. I mean, unless they want to.
Well, yeah.
If you
And
like
there are
it, if you
people
get
who
away,
do.
Yeah.
sure. Like you just mentioned. I mean, that is a very important thing to, not that is, and, doing the work that I'm doing the work that we're doing in any way, it's like there is a layer of this that like the human needs to really want to
Mm-hmm.
not want to be in that victimhood, not to be in that
Yes.
victim state. And that's hard to see sometimes, or even to feel out, because it's like, why? But again, it's dropping the seeds and then
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Deliverance is for the desperate. I counsel people, women mostly, and I have people come to me, and you figure out pretty quick who really wants help. And the ones that don't, I don't spend my time on.
Exactly.
I quietly let them go because it's a waste of my time. Because then it becomes their game, and it becomes their game for attention in a lot of ways.
Yep.
They have to really want it.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you both so much again for coming on. And, I have an open invitation for us to speak more in the future, because this is, again, a very vital conversation to have. And again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Disrupt Now podcast. Please leave us a review. Also, if you want to get these episodes to your inbox, go to disruptnowpodcast.com and you can drop your email in. You can also see all of the episodes since day one. If you want to drop a line, email us at info@natalieviglione.com. Thank you for being here on this journey to awaken the magic again.